Istanbul, a city at the crossroads of continents, the capital of 3 world empires, a treasure house of monuments to great civilizations. For 2,000 years, Istanbul has been coveted by outsiders, loved for its mosaic of cultures, but plundered for its wealth. It's been the target of adventurers with dreams of global conquest, and endured more warfare than any other place on earth. The battles waged on its mighty walls destroyed great kingdoms, but those fought in its parlors and palace bedrooms were just as deadly. To win Istanbul, a harem girl seduced an empire. Crusaders gambled their souls, and a Cold War spy betrayed his country. These are stories of intrigue at the crossroads of the world that changed the world forever. In Istanbul, Turkey, Europe and Asia almost meet, separated by just a waterway, the Bosphorus. Istanbul lives on both shores. It is the world's only city to span 2 continents. Its European side is divided again by a harbour. The waterways converge in what's called the Old City. For more than 2,000 years, they have deposited riches in commerce, religions, and people. Istanbul grew into a kaleidoscope of cultures that flowed in from the 4 corners of the earth. In the faiths and customs of its people are fragments of Istanbul's turbulent history. It's a story of great powers who have tried to make the city their own. They coveted Istanbul because its hold over water routes and continents made it an ideal home for empires. From a strategic standpoint, the old city is the most valuable real estate in the world. For this, Istanbul has always been in danger. To win it, invaders wielded armies and intrigue. It was named Constantinople for Roman Emperor Constantine the Great. In 330 AD, he claimed it for Rome and established the Byzantine Empire. This world power was the staunchest defender of the Christian faith. Constantinople grew into the richest city on earth. But a people from Central Asia had their eye on Byzantium. As the empire declined, they advanced. The nearly invincible Ottomans took the city in 1453 and were first to call it Istanbul. Muslims, they wielded Istanbul's strategic power like a sword to wage a holy war on Europe. It took a great hero to break the chain of invasion. During World War I, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk led the Turks to victory at Gallipoli. He later expelled foreign powers and founded the Turkish Republic. Atatürk foresaw the impending Second World War and its threat to Turkey's newfound freedom. Only neutrality would ensure its independence. But a plot to draw Turkey into the war brought the war to Istanbul. March the 11th, 1941. At the height of World War II, the Orient Express thunders towards Istanbul. For a half-century, the famous train has made a 2,000-mile journey between Paris and the East. Now it gives sanctuary from the war. Celebrities and spies, criminals and kings have all enjoyed this journey. But on this day, its passengers are running for their lives. They seek refuge from the fighting in the train's stately carriages. None is more relieved to be on board than British Ambassador Sir George Rendell. He caught the train in Bulgaria, just ahead of the German army. Now he's on an urgent mission to Istanbul. Relations between England and Turkey are tense. Rendell must help assure that Turkey does not join the German side, if he survives the evening. Just days ago, a member of his staff disappeared on the Orient Express. And in the baggage car, a mysterious piece of luggage has been mixed with Rendell's own. Their destination, Istanbul, a city on the edge of an inferno. By the spring of 1941, Hitler's war machine has all but completed the capture of Western Europe. The Germans will invade Yugoslavia and Greece next, in a path moving steadily towards Turkey.
Look at it on the map. Put a dot where Turkey is, put a pin there and spin it round, and you'll find that it's pretty much the belly button of the world. It's the most strategic spot in the world. There's Asia, there's Europe, there's Russia, there's the Mediterranean underneath. It all comes together right there. And it is, for Europe, the access point to the oil in the Middle East. And if the Allies lost it, if Turkey went on the side of the Axis powers, that would have choked off the Allies' supply to oil, and it would have finished them off. Rendell went to Istanbul to solidify the position of neutrality that Turkey had in the war. The Germans thought that if they had Rendell killed on Turkish soil, that would create tension between the Allies and Turkey. So it was a crucial game that was played there.
Istanbul seems serene in the eye of the storm. The city raised on battle is unmoved by the latest threat of disaster. But behind its calm exterior, another kind of war has always raged. A war of intrigue. Istanbul's Sirkeci station is the last train station before Europe turns into Asia. It's the end of the line for the Orient Express. In 1941, when Ambassador Rendell arrives here, it's a gateway to a world of spies.
Well, you just have to imagine what it was like there. It was surrounded by all these great powers that were fighting a war all around it. I mean, it was smoke everywhere around it, and in the middle of it was Turkey trying desperately to remain neutral. In Istanbul, it was where it all condensed. It was a place where the war went on by other means. A war of espionage and of secret maneuvering, a subterranean kind of war of intrigue. It would erupt momentarily in quiet little medieval corners of Istanbul, and then all of a sudden there'd be a bomb planted or somebody strangled or a bullet going off somewhere, and some strategic aim would be fulfilled. Rendell, if you can imagine, he may have been marginally safer than in a place where bombs were falling, but he had to be on his toes.
Rendell's destination is called Beyoğlu. It's a part of Istanbul where foreign embassies and secret agents once lived cozily together. Their meeting place was an oasis for spies from everywhere, the Topkapi Palace Hotel. Often heard here was a song celebrating the world of cloak and dagger.
I'm involved in a dangerous game. Every other day I change my name. My face is different, but my body is the same. Boo-boo, baby, I'm a spy. Of course you've heard of me.
Since its founding in 1892, the Topkapi Palace has seized a place in espionage lore. From Mata Hari to Alfred Hitchcock, its guest list was a who's who of intriguing characters. It's said that its Orient bar inspired Rick's Cafe in the film noir classic Casablanca.
But look, my sweet, let's be discreet and operate.
While World War II raged in Europe, Istanbul's spies fought a war of nerves over cocktails in the aptly named Agatha Christie Ballroom. The British author chose room 411 to pen her classic Murder on the Orient Express. Then, in 1926, she mysteriously vanished for 11 days. The popular account is that Christie returned to the Palace for a romantic tryst with the author of the Maltese Falcon, Dashiell Hammett. Stranger than any fiction these writers could invent was the real-life thriller that would take place years later in the lobby below. "9:35 p.m. Ambassador Rendell arrives at the Palace. A porter leaves his bags in the lobby. Jazz music reminds Rendell that the Orient Bar is just a few steps away. Allegedly, he says, "I'd die for a whiskey." Instead, it saves his life. This correspondent visited the hotel shortly after the bombing. The entire ground floor wall was blown out. The explosion was timed to inflict the maximum harm on innocent persons, possibly with the idea that the British might think the Turks were responsible. In the aftermath, 6 lay dead, 17 are injured. Germany denies blame, but a Turkish spy comes forward with intriguing evidence. He claims Gestapo spy Paula Koch had lived at the Palace until just days before the blast. And on that day, he saw in front of the post office high-ranking Nazi agent Walter Brell. Despite these allegations, who really blew up the Palace was never proven. The hotel slowly recovered. Ambassador Rendell carried out his mission, cautiously. And the Turkish authorities rounded up the usual suspects and gave them a warning.
Well, I think after the Palace bombing, what happened is that the tangible presence of espionage suddenly went behind closed doors. The Turks leaned on everybody. They said, if you're going to do this, do it so that it doesn't affect the Turks. If you want us to remain neutral, these are the conditions under which you have to carry on your intrigues. And that's something that everybody remarkably agreed to.
Before the war's end, Turkey sided with the Allies, declaring war on Germany. For Istanbul, the bomb plot was merely the latest in a long line of intrigues meant to change its fate. The most destructive took place more than 500 years ago and laid to waste a great civilization. These mighty walls once guarded the richest city on earth. Armies from Persia, Arabia, and Russia flung themselves against these impenetrable defenses. For almost 1,000 years, the city withstood a near constant state of siege. The time was the Dark Ages. The city, Constantinople. Ultimately, Constantinople's defenses were not enough. Centuries of invasion have taken their toll. Only a handful of monuments remain from the city's life as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. But there are living reminders too. Mass at the Church of the Patriarch preserves the sounds and images of the Byzantines' days of glory. Then, Constantinople was a city of faith that possessed the wealth of Midas. It was said to hold more gold than Europe and Asia combined. The art that filled its churches was the envy of the world. And in the world there was no church greater than Hagia Sophia, built just 5 centuries after Christ. Its 184-foot high dome was the wonder of the medieval age. An early writer claimed it was not founded on masonry, but suspended from heaven by a golden chain. Inside was a vast storehouse of sacred loot. Hagia Sophia once contained a gold altar, gold crosses, silver chalices, and precious mosaics. The great church was one of the many marvels that made Constantinople an irresistible beacon for invaders. The Byzantines called their capital the city defended by God. But God couldn't save Constantinople from a Christian crusade.
It was just a scene of total barbaric vandalism. And all done by people who were wearing the cross of Christ on their shoulders, who were there on a crusade to save the holy places. No wonder the Byzantines were shocked.
In 1198, the Pope got the trouble started. Muslims had captured the Holy Lands in and around Jerusalem. Pope Innocent III beseeched Europe's knights and nobles to go and get them back. The crusade was launched from Venice. Here, the crusade's leaders placed an order for supplies so large it kept the Venetians busy for a year. Enough ships and provisions to carry 33,000 men and 4,500 horses. Then, everything went wrong. When the ships were ready, the crusaders were not. By the appointed day, only a third of those who'd promised to go had shown up in Venice. But the Venetians had fulfilled their part of the deal, and the bill was due. Venice's ruler, called the Doge, invited the Crusade's leaders to his palace to talk things over. There they encountered a man, stone blind, bent with age, in his 80s by most accounts. But if the Crusaders thought Doge Dandolo would overlook what they owed Venice, they were badly mistaken. The blind man proposed to take them to the Holy Land as planned, but on the way, they'd settle an old score for Venice. A foreign king had seized a Venetian port called Zara. Dandolo and his new army of crusaders took it back, and while they were in Zara, the crusade took another unexpected turn. A Byzantine prince called Alexius came to Dandolo with an offer. He claimed to have been cheated out of Constantinople's throne. He would pay the crusaders' debt to Venice in exchange for a favor.
He said, if you will put me with your great wonderful army that's here, if you will put me and my father back on the throne, which is rightfully ours, we will help you. We will go on to the Holy Land with you. We'll open up our treasury for you. We'll double the size of your army. I'll give you 10,000 of my best cavalrymen. And Dandolo suddenly sniffs big possibilities here.
Dandolo had no love for Constantinople. He'd been there before as a diplomat. A legend even claims a Byzantine emperor had him blinded. He assured the Crusaders it would be a brief detour on their way to the Holy Land. For their part, the Crusaders must have been curious. They would be going to a place most knew only from legends. The richest city on earth. One Crusader wrote, "I can assure you that those who had never seen Constantinople before never imagined there could be so fine a place in all the world. They noted the high walls and lofty towers encircling it, its rich palaces and tall churches. There was indeed no man so brave and daring that his flesh did not shudder at the sight." Prince Alexius told the Crusaders no fighting would be called for. Constantinople would welcome him back with open arms. But when they sailed past the city's walls, with Alexius in the bow of a ship, he was pelted with trash and insults. Barred from entering, the Crusaders were forced to camp outside the city. Now they were penniless, stranded, and angry. And as they pondered their dilemma, they gazed upon a place that had shrugged off armies 10 times their size. Doge Dandolo argued for attack, but he didn't think much of their chances. He said, "My lords, I know more about conditions in these parts than you do, since I have been here before. You are now engaged on the most dangerous enterprise that any people up to this day have ever undertaken." The cavalry attacked by land at the city's northwest edge. At the same time, the Venetian galleys charged the sea walls. But the defenders on shore kept them at bay, until Dandolo single-handedly turned the tide. According to the Crusade's chronicler, the Doge of Venice, although an old man and blind, cried out to his men to put him on shore if they valued their skins. As soon as the other Venetians saw his banner on land, all made for the shore. It would take 2 battles and 3 fires to subdue Constantinople. The Crusaders put Alexius back on the throne, but he was promptly strangled by a rival. So the Crusaders did away with the Byzantine royalty altogether. Dandolo moved into their palace. His army looted the city.
Don't forget that Constantinople was the richest, the most opulent, the most sumptuous city in the known world. And these crusaders just fell on it like locusts. They robbed the churches, they seized all the gold icons, they probably melted a lot of the gold down. They didn't even see them as works of art, they just saw them as bullion. And I say that the city is left a gutted shell. I think it's probably one of the greatest disasters to Western civilization in the history of the world.
Some of the raiders were after objects more valuable than gold, treasures that could only be found in the Church of Christ Pantocrator. A crusader made his way here in search of holy relics. He forced its priest to take him to a chest. Inside, it is said, were pieces of the cross Christ died on, the spear that pierced his side, vials of his blood. One holy relic remains in the city, the gold-encased hand of St. John the Baptist. Now, before the dust had settled on Constantinople, rumours tied Doge Dandolo to a villainous plot. They claimed Dandolo had never intended to take the Crusaders to the Holy Land at all. All along, he'd planned to attack Venice's rival, Constantinople.
I don't think you can call him a villain. He certainly didn't plan the Fourth Crusade the way it turned out, because he couldn't have. He didn't know what was going to happen. He didn't know that this emperor was going to get deposed. He didn't know that the opportunity for an invasion of Constantinople might ever present itself. He acted always according to his lights as what was best for the Republic of Venice. He was an opportunist, if you like. He was an adventurer. And he was proved, from the Venetian point of view, which is the only point of view by which you can possibly judge him, the best Doge Venice ever had.
While the Crusaders sailed back to Europe in boats heavy with gold, Dandolo shipped the best art home to Venice. Much of it went into the treasury of his church, the Basilica of St. Mark. Its face was adorned with bronze horses stolen from Constantinople's hippodrome. From the conquest of Constantinople, Venice grew into a mighty sea power. Yet Dandolo never returned to his beloved republic. He found his way back to Hagia Sophia, stripped by now of everything that could be carried. He preferred adventure to governing, and stayed on after the crusade to fight the Byzantines who had fled the city. It is believed that on a military expedition while in his 90s, Dandolo received a mortal wound. He was buried in Hagia Sophia's South Gallery, where a slab of marble bears the inscription, Henricus Dandolo. The devastation Dandolo brought to Constantinople would leave the city vulnerable to new invaders, including one called the Scourge of Heaven. At the monastery of the Whirling Dervishes are present-day reminders of medieval magic. The dervishes are an Islamic sect who claim their dance frees them from earthly ties and brings them closer to God. At times in their history, the dervishes have been outlawed, but when they came to Istanbul, they performed at royal celebrations. Then, new invaders had taken the city after the crusade left it vulnerable. They were the Ottomans, a Turkish dynasty from Central Asia. In 1453, they won Istanbul and gave it much of its contemporary face. Towering mosques took over the landscape. Great churches such as Hagia Sophia were converted to Islam. Awed by Hagia Sophia, the Ottomans created its majestic rival, the Blue Mosque. With the Ottomans, Islam replaced Christianity as the city's dominant faith. Though cruel abroad, the dynasty was tolerant at home. Istanbul embraced many religions. Religion wasn't the only monumental change to sweep over Istanbul. The Ottomans were Turks and brought their race here.
People don't seem to realize that in the land we now call Turkey, there was not, virtually speaking, a single Turk until the end of the 11th century. The Turks were an invading race who came in from Central Asia, and from that moment on, they were steadily advancing. If Constantinople had remained rich, strong, powerful, there's a very good chance she could have held back the Turkish tide.
By the 16th century, the Ottomans had left an indelible mark on their new capital. The next step was to use the city to take over the world. Istanbul's location made it the perfect command center for one of the most daring military assaults of all time. From Istanbul, the Ottomans invaded Europe all the way to Vienna. Their secret weapon were elite soldiers called the Janissaries.
When the Janissaries came up over the hills towards the castles, the sight and the noise and the words and everything about them was so new and so unique to the European. They were virtually the soldiers from hell. They would march behind a group called a mehter band that raised cymbals on stakes they had never seen before. They would shake weapons, shake musical instruments that jangled, that conjured up all noises of hell that you could imagine. They called out the name of a foreign god, to the god that was considered the devil, the Antichrist at that time. This is what made them both the scourge of Europe and made them successful on the field.
The Sultan who took the fight to Vienna was Suleiman the Magnificent. He called himself Sultan of Sultans and God's shadow on earth. Europeans called him the Scourge of Heaven, for he threatened to destroy their world. By age 32, he had crushed the Hungarian army. Then he besieged Vienna, leaving 20,000 Christians dead. He lined the road to his camp with the heads of those he'd conquered. Even though he was turned back at Vienna, Europe feared the same fate.
If it hadn't been stopped then, it's probably unlikely that Well, I mean, you and I, we don't know. We might not even be talking English today.
Under Suleiman, Istanbul became the center of an empire spanning nearly 1 million square miles. Suleiman ruled it from the palace of conquerors, Topkapi. It was built here to stand guard over Istanbul's most strategic point, where the Bosphorus and Golden Horn meet. At Topkapi's heart lay the imperial harem, some 300 rooms housing the Sultan's female slaves. One Russian slave would seduce the Sultan, murder her rivals, and cripple Suleiman's empire. Her name was Roxelana, and she came to the harem as the spoils of war. The harem had a more practical purpose than to indulge the Sultan. It was created to assure that the dynasty had plenty of male heirs. Elsewhere, royal families collapsed for lack of sons. The Ottomans solved the problem by making fatherhood a virtual certainty. Young beauties captured in war or bought in slave markets were schooled in music, languages, and the erotic arts. Sultans kept as many as 400 concubines, but chose just one for each night's pleasure. The harem's choosing ritual was followed by cold accounting. Scribes noted every conquest to keep track of the dynasty's bloodlines. Having many sons all vying to be sultan might have meant chaos, except for another efficient Ottoman custom. Once in power, each new sultan had the right to slay his rivals, his own brothers. Thus, each coronation brought great joy and swift brutality. Harem mothers upheld a mask of contentment, but behind it they'd stop at nothing to save their sons. None would match Roxelana. The delicate Russian beauty seduced Suleiman with letters. She would win his heart, then get away with murder. By God, and again by God, I burn day and night in the fire of separation from you. If the seas were ink and the trees pens, when could they write an account of this parting? Oh, my love of black hair with bow-like eyebrows, with languorous, perfidious eyes, if I die, you are my killer, oh merciless, infidel woman.
She would write to him when he was in the field, when he was on campaign. She would let him know what was going on in the palace. Once she had the complete attention of the Sultan, and after he had decided he couldn't live without her for whatever reasons, her wonderful voice, then she willed him to marry her. And this was quite unusual. It went against the grain of the dynasty. It meant that in the future, if she could do away with the son of her adversary, then her son would become sultan, and she would become the most powerful woman in the realm. She would become the mother of the sultan.
While Suleiman was on campaign, Roxelana stayed behind, plotting her enemy's destruction. The palace harem was her best conspirator. Its labyrinth of rooms made eavesdropping easy. Here, rumors and gossip spread like wildfire. Roxelana became expert at fanning their flames.
She had 3 enemies within the palace. The woman she had to move out of the way, first of all, was the mother of the oldest son of the Sultan. not married to the Sultan, but a concubine. Her name, the mother, was Mahidevran. Mahidevran wanted her son Mustafa to rise to the throne, so Mustafa, of course, was the second person who was in her way. And the other person who was a difficulty for her was Ibrahim. Ibrahim Pasha was a Grand Vizier. He was a boon companion of the Sultan. He was a hunting friend, but he was also the key advisor. And Hürrem Sultan, or Roxolana, saw herself as the closest advisor.
Ibrahim was on the battlefield when Roxolana turned Suleiman against him. She accused the Sultan's advisor of aspiring to be Sultan himself. Though he returned victorious to Topkapi, Ibrahim did not get a hero's welcome. The next morning, his body was discovered outside a palace gate, strangled. Suleiman ordered him buried in an unmarked grave at the monastery of the whirling dervishes. Mahidevran, Roxolana's main rival, made the mistake of picking a fight with her. Roxolana went to her master, bearing the scars of the battle. Suleiman banished Mahidevran to a distant city forever. Finally, Mustafa, the heir apparent. If he became king, Roxolana's son would die. She started a rumor that Mustafa intended to retire his father. The aging Suleiman succumbed to the gossip while on campaign. When Mustafa entered his father's tent, he was met by executioners.
Roxolana wasn't an assassin. She was a product of her time. She was putting into practice a policy that had been in the field for a long time, and that is the best among equals rose to the top. And Roxolana saw herself as the best among equals, and that meant doing away with your enemies. So she did away with her enemies. She was using warfare, but warfare in the palace.
The palace never recovered. Roxolana won the battle to put her son on the throne, but the empire lost. He was a drunk, nicknamed Selim the Sot. His reign marked the end of the age of magnificent sultans. Harem queens followed Roxolana's example, seizing power and breeding disaster. To protect their sons from being killed by rivals, harem mothers literally walled them up. From a place known as the cage, an imprisoned son would emerge to become sultan. Yet years of isolation left many demented and some murderous. Their atrocities shamed the dynasty. Suleiman had once had a chance to defuse the harem's power. Advisors had urged him to move the harem out of the palace before its influence grew. Roxolana proposed building a mosque with the money instead. In the shadow of that mosque, Suleiman and Roxolana's tombs lie side by side. And the love-struck king reigns over eternity beside his bewitching Russian queen. In the 20th century, Istanbul would inspire another Russian to make a daring break for freedom. And the most dangerous spy of the Cold War would come here to track him down. From its earliest history, Istanbul's grip on the Bosphorus gave it a stranglehold on commerce coming out of Russia. Istanbul levied tariffs on ships passing its front door and had first choice of the fruits of Black Sea trade. Istanbul also controlled the overland flow of goods bound for Europe from the Far East. At the intersection of two great trade routes are the city's famed bazaars. It was in Istanbul's bazaars that Europeans got their first taste of the Orient spices and tea. These commodities came from the east on the fabled Silk Road. Earlier this century, the East also brought Istanbul the first chilly winds of the Cold War. Under the old city's monuments lies the Basilica cistern. The reservoir supplied water to Istanbul when it was called Constantinople. As the Cold War begins, Soviet spies allegedly trade secrets among its ghostly columns. In 1945, they poured into Istanbul by the hundreds. They arrive in the winter. Russian ships appeared off Istanbul's coast. They take advantage of the busy waterway to smuggle in unwelcome cargo. Secret agents, dropped off in rafts to make their way ashore. For the Soviet Union is planning for an invasion. Having suffered 20 million deaths in World War II, the Soviets seek a buffer zone against aggression from Europe. Stalin's troops linger in Eastern Europe and along the Mediterranean to snatch up nations for the Soviet bloc. In response, American warships will soon appear in the Bosphorus near Istanbul. Turkey masses troops along the Turco-Russian border and joins the US on the front lines of the Cold War. The 170-foot-high Galata Tower overlooks Istanbul's Beyoğlu district, the most ancient part of the city. Its cobbled avenues are home to the consulates of the Cold War, including the Soviet Union, Germany, and Great Britain. The summer of 1945 finds them in an uneasy truce, but on August the 5th, a Soviet spy comes to the British consulate and brings the truce to an end. He is Konstantin Volkov, a secret agent posing as a diplomat. He asks for asylum in Great Britain and 33,000 English pounds. In return, he will identify 7 Englishmen who are spying for the Soviet Union. He claims that one of them has infiltrated the offices of British intelligence and now even heads a department there. Volkov offers one thing more: keys to a hotel room in Moscow. In it are documents identifying the 7 English spies. Volkov's allegations reach London. The defector trusts that the British intelligence service will be discreet. They aren't. Volkov is warned that one of the spies heads an intelligence department. But the case is assigned to Kim Philby, head of Soviet counterintelligence. He is to go to Istanbul and bring Volkov back.
Philby didn't leave London quite so quickly as he should have done. He dawdled his way across Europe, the 1,600 miles to Istanbul, to fulfill his orders. He went on across down to Malta, played around there for a day or two, went on across to North Africa, El Adam, Benina, Tripoli, down to Cairo, up to Cyprus, dawdling all the way, so that what should have taken him 16 hours, in point of fact, took something like 16 days, but nobody in London knew this.
There was a lot more about Kim Philby that London should have known. Evidence from his past would have told them that Philby had communist connections and might have been a communist himself. All London had to do was look into the secret agent's years as an undergraduate at Cambridge University. There, communism held special allure to rebellious sons and daughters of aristocracy. Philby belonged to an elite group who'd taken communism to heart. It included Donald Maclean and Guy Burgess. After university, the three remained friends. Burgess helped Philby get his job in the British intelligence service. Nearly 3 weeks after Volkov came forward, Philby finally reaches Istanbul. According to the hotel's account, he heads for the Pera Palace. There he checks in under an assumed name. The dashing agent bears all the traits of English aristocracy: an air of command, a Cambridge accent, a fondness for drink. And in Istanbul, Philby behaves as if he's on holiday.
When he arrived in Istanbul, instead of going right to work on the question of the Russian defector, our man went off and spent a weekend on the yacht with the British ambassador to Turkey.
Philby's colleagues notice he seems uninterested in the Volkov case and its outcome, but nobody tells London.
That 2 days in the yacht was fatal from the point of view of Mr. Volkov, who was very anxious to get moving to England and to pick up his cheque for £33,000 gold.
On Monday morning, Philby finally tries to contact Volkov. Volkov has been posing as a diplomat, so a phone call to his office at the Soviet consulate shouldn't raise suspicion. At the British consulate, Philby and the diplomats make the call. What happens then suggests that there's been a serious leak in the case.
When the telephone at the embassy rang, Volkov didn't answer his line. A man answered it, and he sounded like Volkov, but it was not Volkov. So when they rang back again, a girl came on the line. She announced that Mr. Volkov had left Istanbul. That was the last that anybody heard of Volkov. Somebody had betrayed Volkov.
Had Volkov been more forthcoming with what he knew, he might have been able to save himself. For one of the names he was ready to hand over to British intelligence was that of Kim Philby. When they dispatched Philby to Istanbul, London had no idea they had signed Volkov's death warrant. Philby had alerted his Soviet colleagues and prolonged his trip to Istanbul to give them time to react. Whether Philby took part in Volkov's kidnapping isn't known. What's more clear is that in Moscow an awful fate awaited the defector.
Some years later, when I was in Moscow at KGB headquarters, I asked about this, and they said, yes, he'd been executed. He'd been thrown into the furnace at the KGB headquarters on Dzerzhinsky Square. Nothing improbable about that. In fact, it might have been improbable if they'd just merely shot him.
Volkov was not Kim Philby's only victim. Philby would send countless spies to their deaths as the most notorious double agent of the Cold War. In 1945, his spy career was just beginning. The Volkov affair nearly brought it to an end. Philby left Istanbul with a great weight lifted from his shoulders. Yet he'd returned to the city just 2 years later, his position with British intelligence still intact. Ironically, his job was to get British agents into Russia. Philby and his Cambridge friends, Burgess and Maclean, would spy for the Soviets for years. They'd provide secrets about American plans for the atomic bomb and strategy during the Korean War. In 1963, Philby fled to the Soviet Union. He ended his career in Moscow as a colonel in the KGB. For a lifetime of deception, he was awarded the Order of Lenin and a postage stamp with his likeness. Yet, as Philby confessed, after the near miss in Istanbul, where history's most destructive spy ring was nearly exposed, he never felt safe again. It's been called the city of the world's desire. And after 2,000 years, it still captivates. Caught between Europe and Asia, Istanbul has seen more than its share of conflict. Every journey here retraces an invader's path. None could hold on to the city forever, but before moving on, they left the best of their worlds behind.
I defy you to think of another city that has as many influences and has been as coveted by as many great civilizations as Istanbul. There are all these interleavings of different cultural influences because they coveted it, they fought for it, and when they got it, they put their own layer, their own patina over it, of their own civilization.
The fall of the Soviet Union freed a wave of entrepreneurs to seek their fortunes in Istanbul. They come by train to Sakici station and make their way to the city's heart. Istanbul has made a place for its newest invaders in a neighborhood dubbed the Russian market. What they buy here, most resell at home. Some never go home again. They've come to covet the remarkable city of the crossroads of the world. And like kings and criminals, spies and slaves, Istanbul claims them for itself.